Welcome to Clachtoll Broch. I've come just a little way north on the coastal footpath from Clachtoll to what might at first sight appear to be just a pile of stones. We're located on the northwest coast of the Scottish mainland, where the Atlantic crashes against rocks that are a billion years old. People have been living in this area for at least 6,000 years, and the remains of the earliest chambered cairns, which they used for burials, are out to the east. The structure I'm going to show you today is not as old as that, so let's go and have a closer look.
A broch is a circular double-walled tower made entirely without mortar, and there is a tapering hollow space between the walls. Brochs are only found in Scotland. They were cleverly designed to cope with a range of structural stresses, but sometimes the strain was too much and they collapsed. There are several hundred brochs in Scotland, most of them in the north of the country.
Brochs were all built in the Iron Age, somewhere we think between 300 and 400 BC. We don't yet have a date for the exact start of this particular broch, but we do know that the last period of occupation was in the last century BC and perhaps running into the first few decades AD. So what sort of people might have lived in the broch?
The Iron Age was a violent time in other parts of Scotland, with tribes and warriors which included skilled horsemen and hunters, fierce fighters and charioteers. But that might not have been the case in this part of the country, where, for instance, a chariot is not much use in a mountainous, rocky landscape with virtually no level ground.
The people who lived here would have been native to the area, the descendants of the Bronze Age peoples who'd lived here for several centuries beforehand. They would have been involved in farming, to a certain extent probably in fishing, either in the lochs or in the sea. They'd have been involved in trade. Their main links to the outside world would have been via the sea. And while there's no direct evidence of violence in this particular area, they were probably armed and ready to protect themselves from cattle raiders and tribal rivals.
Clachtoll was right beside the main prehistoric and early historic trade and travel highway for the whole of Western Britain, from Shetland to Spain and the wider Mediterranean. This highway was no road though. Roads only arrived here in recent centuries. This superhighway was the sea. Down the coast to the south, people may have spoken an early form of Gaelic, while in the north and east they probably spoke an early form of Pictish. But we don't know what was spoken here. But living beside a highway between those two language areas makes it possible that some folks in Assynt were bilingual.
The broch was basically a grandiose tower and built of very, very heavy stone that was quarried locally. I can vouch for the heaviness of the stone because I was one of the team of volunteers who helped the professional archaeologists last year as we removed the rubble from the interior. 275 tons of stone. The word broch comes from the Lowland Scots or English word burg or borough and suggests something fortified, but it would be wrong really to think of this as a fortress. Rather, it's a defendable tower, but designed primarily to be a very impressive statement of status by one of the local families. The broch here at Clachtoll is built on 3 huge steps of bedrock, and if you look at the walling on this side, on the east side, it's nearly 2 to 3 meters lower than it is for the foundation on the far side. building the Broch on these great big steps with such a difference in height seems to have built some instability into the whole structure. And there's one reasonably good example of that just here. Originally there was a corridor running from just inside the entrance through this middle of this wall in front of me here and coming up over there, and that's been blocked up and turned into 3 chambers by putting blocks of masonry in there and a new entrance in here. There are lots of theories as to why Brochs were built, but from the evidence that we've got here, we think that this is a grandiose farmhouse. And from the finds that we came across when we were excavating, we're fairly sure that there was a major fire and people ran away and ran out, leaving things behind them. And we found all sorts of bits and pieces, and I've got a few of them here. This is a stone lamp, one of the largest that we found. We've got about a dozen of those. Little tiny decorative bead which may have hung on a piece of leather or something to act as a pendant. A couple of pieces of the pottery with different kinds of design. This is a spindle whorl, for you put that on a stick and you can then draw out thread from a fleece. And one of our nicest finds is this antler weaving comb, which would be used as part of the sort of weaving process to tap down the threads. And then in other parts of the Broch we found a lot of metal tools, mainly over that side, axe, sickles. We found more and more pottery, more lamps, more spindle whorls. We've got a very large number of spindle whorls, but we also found lots of things made out of bone and antler and various bits and pieces.
So why would people choose to live here? Well, take a look around you. The owner of this Broch has unrestricted sea views, white sandy beaches, beautiful clear turquoise seas, and the most amazing sunsets. We have lots full of fish, great hunting and lush pastures for grazing your animals. This house is right beside one of the busiest shipping lanes of its time. If ever it was a case of location, 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 then you have it all right here.
The Broch came to a dramatic and sudden end in the last few decades BC, or maybe a few years later, when there was a massive fire. And in that fire, all of the upper areas of the Broch, the roofs and the platforms that were at higher levels, they all came crashing down. The people who were here fled, leaving everything behind them. And then for a short time, the tower continued to stand, but then it collapsed down in on top of everything. And that was the rubble that we cleared when we started the excavation. So I hope that's whetted your appetite for a visit to Clachtoll Broch. You can come and see us at any time. It lies halfway between Clachtoll and Storr on the northwest coast of Scotland, and you can find out more details on our website and on the Historic Assynt Facebook page, details of which will follow.
The sun sets in eerie glow over mountains dressed in silver snow. Windswept surrender from a shoreline of creatures, sea foam sprays, the surface lays sleepless. Lines cast into the loch where fish danced around the rock. When winter wakes from its silent slumber, salt air aches in fear of fire and thunder. Though all of its uses are that of a mystery, it is believed that wealth holds its history. Secrets whisper in the gales, where shadows cast, the story unveils. Stood tall upon the barren land, walls built with purpose by strong, capable hands. Far from tribes and safely set, the rubble tells of the fate it met. The remains of a tower, victim to blaze, gives us insight into